right. First and foremost, welcome to PacWest Bigfoot here from the beautiful Pacific Northwest. And just wanted to say real quick, so sorry guys about through August a few times the shop software for the store on the site kind of broke. And we had to fix it a few times. So I've got products that are going out the door right now. It broke again last week, so we fixed it. Everything's going out the door, so you guys will have your stuff pretty soon. Even those of you who won something, it should be out there in the next 10 days. So there you go, and thank you so very much for being so patient with me. Let's get into this week's Bigfoot or PacWest Bigfoot encounter story. And I'm reading this in the morning, so please forgive me. I am very tired. It has been a very busy week. Actually, busy last 2 weeks playing catch up and everything after the family vacation. And here's the other thing. I hope you guys had a wonderful summer. Hope you had a wonderful summer. And to tell you the truth, I'm looking forward to fall already. Okay? All right, let me get a sip of the old Sasquatch coffee. There we go. Okay, Bigfoot are not so bogus at the Bogus Creek Campground in Oregon. Bogus Creek Campground. That is where I had seen the scariest monster in my life. A Bigfoot, and one that really did not want me around. I'd been there before when I was young, the Bogus Creek camping area with my mom and dad. Funny thing is, after my own encounter, my mother told me about one night, her and my dad and I, because I was there, had an unusual event they attributed to Bigfoot as well. So, here's what happened to them, to me also, almost 2 decades later. The Bogus Creek is full of Bigfoot. We did a lot of camping and growing up. My family and I lived in Grants Pass, Oregon at that time, just south of town on Highway 99. But we spent a lot of time in the Umpqua National Forest because my mom is from a small town up that way called Glide. She was born in Roseburg and raised in Glide, so spending some time up that highway and in the forest of the Umpqua was familiar to her. It is beautiful there, even when you run into Bigfoot just as we did. Before my encounter, however, my mom and dad had a couple encounter stories of their own. Well, in the end, my mom had 2 experiences, one including my dad just before I was born. Let me tell you about those first. Screaming in the hills. My mother was raised just east of the town of Glide, Oregon. Like I said, about a mile or two up the river past the bridge heading east out of town. Her parents owned a home there on the north side of the highway, just on the side of the ridgeline in the hills and mountains that go on for what seems forever. It was about 2 to 3 acres, she remembered. What she remembered the most, however, was the screaming. And we are not talking about her mom and dad arguing either. They were actually a very happy couple. Grandma and Grandpa were great. The screaming came from the hills every fall. Usually it would start around early September and run through December. It did not happen every night, she stated, but it was frequent enough to keep her and Mom from wandering too far off the property. It was a screaming like a rah, rah, rah sound in which there were 2 short bursts, then a long one at the end that would tail off after about 10 or 15 seconds, she said. The neighbors heard it as well, and even today there are reports from the area of this screaming continuing today. She lived up there until almost high school, which by then they had moved to West Roseburg. She was told later by my grandfather that the screams were from a Bigfoot that roamed the area, or at least the ridge line and the foothills around the area in the winter. It would not be until after my mom and dad married and she was pregnant with me, and was at Bogus Creek in fact, that they both would come to believe wholeheartedly in the existence of Bigfoot. Going once, going twice, bogus. My mom was about 5 months pregnant with me when her and my dad would make a trip up north to camp at her favorite campground at Bogus Creek. And yes, I will keep this short so you can learn about my encounter. It was, I believe, the second night up there when they woke to hear what sounded like kids or children laughing and talking. It was well after midnight, and the fire was all but out. My dad had heard something first. Something had run through the camp. Literally run through it on legs. It caught him off guard and he came out of the tent with a flashlight in hand. My dad was a weightlifter and practiced martial arts, so he usually felt as though he did not need a gun, although there was always one around. Anyway, he came flying out of the tent and for a few seconds there heard the laughter and talking, or better yet, childlike mumbling. My mom at that point was awake as well. He stoked the fire back up and brought it to a pretty decent-sized medium roar. He heard nothing else after that and headed back into the tent after about 20 minutes, give or take. It was 2 hours later when my mom was practically punching his arm trying to wake him. It was tall and still as a statue, and it was Bigfoot. Both of them were sure of it. It had extremely broad shoulders, and the silhouette must have stood at around 7 to 8 feet tall. They never got out of the tent, but the moon, as full as it was, and the campfire burning still brightly, allowed them to see the outline of a tall and human-like shape standing in the middle of their camp. My dad said he kind of cleared his throat real loud and sat up. That is when the thing huffed lightly and walked off. They were scared, but more than that, they were intrigued most of all. From then on, it was all Bogus Creek camping for years to come, even for me. Forward 24 years. My turn. Forward to 2008, and I was on my way to Bogus Creek Campground, this time alone, without the wife and kids. They were attending and volunteering for a vacation Bible school for the week. Me, I was going to take my 3 days off and camp and fish a bit and get a little hiking in if possible. This time was going to be camping towards the furthest point at the end of the camping area, but still within the boundaries of the campground. I don't know if you've ever been there, but even in the high part of the camping season, Bogus Creek can be full one day and empty the next 5 days. My days off were Monday and Tuesday, plus I had a holiday that week and decided to take off Sunday night and get 3 full nights in. Well, I got 2. I left town, Grants Pass, that Sunday afternoon, around 3 p.m. It took me a bit to get there, but by the time I did reach Bogus Creek, I still had a couple 2-3 hours to spend before the sun would even set, being summer and all. So I set up camp, got my fly rod together, and decided I would do a bit of fishing for some panfish that day and hit the river the next. I could not believe in my luck. I caught a few, actually. By the time it looked as though the sun was going down to disappear behind the mountains, I headed back to camp. Yes, thoughts and memories of the stories told to me of this place by my parents entered my mind. Of course, but even after being here a million times after that, nothing else had really happened. No visuals, no experience since then. My mom passed away not too long before this event in my life from breast cancer. My father, unfortunately, today is suffering from Alzheimer's, and has been for some time now. But in those more lucid moments, he would tell me again of that night camping at Bogus Creek. Night came, and so did a roaring fire and a quick text messaging conversation with my wife. Couldn't make any phone calls out there, but I could text. After that, it was a crackling fire and a weird sound off in the distance. Yes, I said weird sounds. I thought coyote, to be honest, and I think there was some mixed in, at least for a bit. At first, however, after a few minutes of coyote calls and howls, something else broke in. Something louder. Something I'd never heard before. It was deeper, but louder, and I have to admit, a whole lot creepier in the dark. It lasted longer and had a kind of, crescendo to it, and then it ended abruptly. It was pretty hair-raising, and a flood of memories of the story told to me from my parents came flooding back. I was still unsure of everything, but I believed they saw and heard something. The story never changed throughout the years, that's for sure, and now I was hearing it. The Mumbler. It died down pretty fast, must have lasted no more than, say, a couple minutes or so. The night settled in, and so did the usual sounds, the ones safe and familiar, and trust me, I am not afraid of the dark, not even today. I ate, I remember, then headed to the tent for some reading, then sleep. I fell asleep with some light music in my ear. By midnight or so, the earbuds must have fallen out, and I was woken to some mumbling, like a voice just outside my tent. At first I thought it was my music, but it was not, As seconds later, I was sitting straight up in my sleeping bag, listening to the weirdest language I'd ever heard, mumbling something or other near my tent. I pitched my tent about 15 feet back from the fire pit. Just in back of it was some trees and thick brush. I mean, seriously, you cannot see past this tent. It was that thick. But that is where the mumbling was coming from. I don't know how to explain it, but it was a raspy sounding voice that was literally, well, much like monkey chatter. After I had a few seconds or so to fully wake up and listen, it was like a monkey just mumbling and chattering away, but softly right behind me. Like my father, I cleared my throat, and wouldn't you know it, the mumbling stopped. However, I heard something move off and back into the forest, and it disappeared for the rest of the night. I got up, got the fire going again, and did not head off to bed again until my heart stopped beating so fast I felt sure that whatever it was, whatever it was in the back of my tent was gone. Pinecone throwers and tent draggers. It was a long, it was a long night, but I slept, even with one proverbial eye open and the 22 under my pillow. The next day I texted the wife when I got down to the river. Well, up above it off the main highway at least. I told her about the experience and I think she got a bit worried. So I ended it with it was probably a bear, which seemed to calm her down a bit. I did some fishing for a few hours that morning, then headed back to camp to have an early lunch and hike up the creek for a bit. I can't tell you what it was, but when I returned to the campsite, it just felt weird, as if someone had been there or something. I can't really explain it. I looked around and decided against the hike for the time being. I cooked up lunch, and finally, people. It was a couple. Not sure if they were married or anything, but they were together and were camping just down the drive from me. I'd say about 4 or 5 campsites down. I decided to say hello when the gentleman looked over in my direction. They were from the Bay Area and camping there by the camping their way through the rest of the Pacific Northwest. It was nice to have people around finally, I have to admit. I felt better and took off up the creek after all. I had walked about 30 minutes, staying along the creek on a small trail that was not at all that clear here and there. Actually, I found myself not even on a trail for that matter. I was just walking and following the creek, as was all. It was way up the creek when I felt something hit me. Not hard, mind you, like something fell off a tree and hit me in the back, but it felt like it was thrown. I don't know if you if you get that, but it just felt as though it did not fall from a tree, but it was thrown right at my back. I looked down and all I saw was a pine cone coming to a standstill along the bank. I looked up and saw nothing. I continued walking for another 50 feet or so, and that is when I felt something again hit me. This time it bounced off my shoulder and landed in front of me. It was a pine cone. It was thrown for sure, and I was not feeling mad or anything. I was feeling a bit worried about who was following me and throwing stuff at me deliberately. I made an about face and headed back to camp. And on the way back, twice I had pine cones thrown in my direction. Twice I saw nobody, no movement. I heard no footsteps or anything. It was really, really odd. I was getting all spooked out before I finally said to myself that was enough, and I was going to just fish for a bit and forget it all. I headed back down to the river for the rest of the day, and it was a peaceful rest of the day. Yeah, I said tent dragging. It was night, and I could see the fire flickering from the neighbors down the way, and the stars were out above. It was a very clear and warm night. I think the younger couple turned in first, and eventually I did too. The mumbling did not return, but screams instead took their place. And it was a human scream, a woman for sure. I was in panic mode as I heard a lady screaming, and it sounded like she was in some serious trouble. Next thing I knew, I heard a man yelling. I was freaked out, but I grabbed my gun and literally tore through the entrance of the tent. 2 of them, 2 of the largest things I'd ever seen in my life, were literally trying to drag that tent with the young couple off. or at least tossed them to and fro in it. Bigfoot. I knew what they were, and it registered in my mind quickly. Both had to be around 7 to 8 feet tall, dark in color, black, maybe dark brown. But it was dark, and the light from the moon and their small fire was just too dim to tell. But I knew what I was looking at. Here and there their eyes would flicker and reflect a very bright, brilliant red color. It was truly a menacing sight. For some reason, though, menacing was all I felt, not life-threatening. It was as if two giant teenagers were acting like, well, teenagers. However, I did not think the couple trapped in that tent thought so. So that is when I pulled the trigger. For a split second, those two massive creatures looked in my direction, and I thought, for the briefest of a second, that I was going to need to make a run for my car. But that was all broken up by a scream from right behind me. It sounded louder, and I could feel it like a vibration that almost hurt. I dropped to my knees and held my ears. Next thing I knew, the two Bigfoot that was harassing the young folks ran almost past me and turned up towards the creek. Can't tell you how scared and in shock that young couple was for the next couple of hours. But we could not get a call out from there, and all I could do was text my wife in the middle of the night. I helped them pack up. Well, I packed them up myself, and when they calmed down, I saw them off. They peeled out of there like I'd never seen anyone leave a place before. I was scared myself and decided the right move was to leave. Just pack up and head home. Stay out of the line of fire, I suppose. I had enough of Bigfoot by that point. No more bogus Bigfoot. I remember their first names, even today, but I'll keep the names of the couple out. I wish I would have had a chance to ask them how it all started that night, but that will remain a mystery even for me. Personally, I am glad it was not me, and a bit surprised it was not. I've also been listening closely online for them to share their story, but nothing so far, unless you've heard anything, Dave. Anyways, that is my encounter story. Thanks, Nathaniel.